Hello, my name is Wojtkowiak. I'm a graduate student at Franciscan University in Steubenville, and today I'm going to talk about the general characteristics of the millennial generation. I'll also discuss their strengths, gaps, and preconceptions that these students bring to the classroom. I'll speak with Mary Petro, a PhD student at Temple University, about her experiences with millennial students. Finally, I will discuss instructional strategies that can be used to teach these students. So first, who are millennials? According to Week 4's PowerPoint by Dr. Bourne, millennials were born between 1982 and 2004. He cites Howe and Strauss as claiming that millennials possess 7 distinguishing traits. First, they're special. Older generations have inculcated in millennials the sense that they are collectively vital to the nation and to their parents' sense of purpose. They're also sheltered. Millennials are the focus of the most sweeping youth safety movement in the American history. Some could also say that they are coddled to some extent also. These students are confident. Millennial teens possessing high levels of trust and optimism and a newly felt connection to parents in the future equate good news for themselves with good news for the country. Millennials are team-oriented. They have a strong team instinct and tight peer bonds and are very accustomed to working in teams. And this has been emphasized from their days in daycare. Millennials are achieving. They're on track to become the best educated, best behaved adult in the nation's history. Millennials are pressured. They're pushed hard to study, avoid personal risks, and take full advantage of the collective opportunities adults are offering them. Millennials feel a trophy kid pressure to excel. Millennials are also conventional. They're more comfortable with their parents' values than any other generation in living memory. Millennials support convention, the idea that social rules can help. So now let's take a moment to listen to a conversation I had with Mary Petro about the millennials generation. Hi everybody, today we're going to talk with Mary Petro about the millennial generation. Hey Mary, how you doing?
Hi.
So in his blog post, Classifying the Millennial Generation, Steve Meyer claims that many would characterize the millennials as sloppy, lazy, insubordinate, undisciplined, cocky, and arrogant. How do you respond to that assessment from your experience, and how do you combat those traits in the classroom or use those traits to develop positive skills?
I guess the word that comes to mind with all of the strings of words would be entitlement a bit more, and I guess that some of those traits can feed into that a little bit, but sort of the notion that if, and I see it in my students, they come to class and sit there and kind of expect that the rest will fall into place. And that's an overgeneralization, and it's a little bit of an exaggeration for most of the students, but for some, unfortunately, it's exactly what happens. Kind of sit and they're present and they get a 68 and then are sort of really up in arms about it. And I think some of that comes from a sense of entitlement, a bit of apathy on some students' parts, and then it also comes from not knowing what it means to study and to be an active agent in your education, and that your education is something that you get for yourself and not that someone gives to you.
Right.
And I think that I've tried to use that in the classroom, that notion that your education is something that you acquire and that you take and that you are actively participating in, and that if you don't do those things, you're not going to get anything out of it. So I try to force my students to do that in the classroom. I don't always prepare PowerPoint slides to put up on the board to feed them the information. I make them ask me questions, and if they can't come up with questions, then that's reflected in their exams, that they're going in blind, kind of.
Right.
If they can, then I try to use what they've asked me, I answer it, and then use that on the exam so that they know that participating actively is going to reward them, and that's how you learn. It's a back and forth exchange, and someone's there to facilitate that, but to not hand them the information.
Right. Very good. Millennials are also known to find more success and motivation when they're able to collaborate with their peers. How have you been able to accommodate them in that regard within the constraints of the lecture format at the university level?
I fortunately haven't been too constrained in the lecture format because I primarily taught smaller sections of classes with 30 to 40 students, and so I was able to not have to work in a large lecture format like that. I do think that students prefer to work in groups. I don't know if it always fosters the best creativity or the fact that they're collaborating motivates them. I think, unfortunately, sometimes it's used as a crutch.
Right.
It's, okay, now I'm in a group and somehow there will be an outcome because there's 4 of us, and takes the weight off an individual student. And I find that sometimes it prevents students from taking initiative and from having the responsibility all on them to produce something that's worthy.
Right.
I think that, and I'm not saying group work isn't good, and I'm not saying that students aren't more excited to work in groups, because they are. I just don't know if it's for the right reasons,
Right.
or is always producing the best end product
Right.
necessarily.
Do you find that students who have been in lecture and then come to you in the small group, do you find that they have maybe a better understanding of material once they're able to sort of have the small group setting as opposed to the lecture setting?
Absolutely. I mean, and I think that if I look at my students from the first day when they come to the small group setting to the end of the semester, there's a drastic change. Because they come in the first day and I say, okay, this is what you saw in lecture. What don't you get? What makes no sense? What don't you understand? And there's just crickets.
Right,
You know,
right.
No, everyone's like trying not to make eye contact with me and looking down and not raising their hand. And I think once that is forced, that collaboration is forced, and it becomes a more comfortable thing for them, I think it works really, really well.
Right.
But it's like shell shock almost. And I think a lot of my students, it's the first time in a university setting. It is very intimidating, especially in those large lectures. And I think that feeling of intimidation carries over
Right.
into the smaller room, and they're trying to navigate how to negotiate all of that,
Right,
and
right.
how to act differently in different situations.
Mhm.
And so after a semester, I think, my room was buzzing, but it takes some time and some pulling of teeth.
They've also said, some of the readings I've done this week has just stated that the millennial generation strives for, or clings to leadership, or they want leadership. However, they don't want leadership that talks down to them, or this leadership that's this big person up top. They want someone who will talk to them and with them as not necessarily a peer, but at an even sort of a more even level. And possibly, I guess, in your classes, it's probably more that, as opposed to like the lecture is this this person that is hard to approach.
Yeah, and I definitely play on that big time. I think I'm closer in age to them. I think I'm much less intimidating than a 70-year-old man.
Right.
And I really do play to that, especially I interact on their level. I'm much more casual in my speech. I make it very clear that that's what I want. But I think that there are boundaries, and they don't, most of the time they don't cross them. I didn't have to set out, when you're learning how to do all of this, they tell you, okay, you have to set out these strict rules, and I never felt the need to do that. There was never a disrespect issue. But yeah, I do think, and it's really important, the second that they feel comfortable is when the second and third class, when I'm not yelling at them, when I'm not scolding them, when I want them to ask questions, when I'm responding positively to them not knowing something. I think that works really, really well.
Perfect. Okay, one more question. So Dr. Tony Wagner asserts in his presentation 7 skills students need for their future that millennial students lack effective oral and written communication skills. Can you speak for a moment about that point from your experience, and what efforts have you made to have successfully improved their communication skills?
It's like, yes. I don't know. Yes. It's a really big challenge, and it's scary. I mean, scary. The way that college students are writing. Most of them have difficulty drafting a professional email. I get emails with texting language in them, with no sort of acknowledgement that they're writing to someone who is their superior. And then papers are worse. I've gotten 10-page papers that are 1 paragraph long.
Oh, wow.
That just are strings of sentences that don't make any sense. And it's, I just kind of start and take a deep breath and I don't even know where to begin, kind of. But I've learned through experience with the emails, I now have to set up my expectations for students when they email me and when they communicate to me what needs to be in the subject line, the pieces of information they need to include in their email, like their name,
Right.
what class
Do the
they're
same
in, and if those pieces aren't there, that they shouldn't expect a response. And it's even in the syllabus at this point, which is absurd on some level, but I think that I've come to accept that that skill isn't there, even though it's so frustrating, and that my only choice is to accept that and try to correct it.
Right.
And as far as papers go, I make them do many drafts. And that's how the class is set up, but my job is to facilitate that. So I get their first draft, it's bad, and I spend a lot of time making a lot of suggestions and corrections, and probably too liberal sometimes with how much I actually give them. I don't say reword this, I reword it for them.
Right.
So they can see how that works. And if they make the effort to change and go through that process and do it in pieces, they do really well. And if they choose not to do that, they don't do well.
Right.
Even if they come to me a week before the semester's over and cry, which
Right.
happens.
Right.
But I think it has to be forced because writing is hard, it's not particularly fun, and if you haven't done it and been taught how to do it until you're 18, that's very painful. But I
Right.
think it's really important. What else is there besides writing and
Right.
communicating?
Right.
So I feel really strongly about that, and it is a big issue.
Right. And do you find that subsequent writing assignments show improvement from the start, or are they right back at the beginning and you need to, again, dissect and reword?
No, they're better. I mean, the students who don't put the effort in on the
Right,
first one,
for sure.
obviously you don't see that, but the students who do, I think that the concept of how to even construct a paragraph is lacking
Mhm.
at times. Well, this is what you want to do, and this is what the structure of the paper, this is what it should look like, and this is the point of an introduction, and this is the point of a conclusion.
Right.
And I think they understand how the pieces work together a bit more, and there's evidence in that, the understanding of the structure of writing, more so than I see improvements in grammar and things in
Right.
one paper, because that's something that you have to practice for a really long time.
Certainly.
But yeah, absolutely, if they put the time in, the pieces start to come together a bit more.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time today.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Mary Ian Petro. Let's talk a little bit about millennials in the classroom and what we can do to best suit them in the classroom. Since millennials grown up with technology, they're multitaskers. They might be texting, playing a video game, or having a conversation all at the same time. As a result, their attention spans aren't well suited for a lecture formatted class. So you have to find alternatives to the lecture format in your classroom. The incorporation of Web 2.0 tools and mobile technology will help maintain their interests. Millennials need to be able to collaborate with their classmates in smaller groups. They don't do well in larger groups, but groups of 2 or 3 on projects and activities will suit them best. They also want to have projects that have real-world connection. They want to know that what they're working on is going to not only apply to themselves, but to the world around them. While they prefer to collaborate, teachers, though, must make sure that they provide very detailed policies or instructions or a very clear framework for managing team problems. Don't expect them to be able to settle arguments or settle situations where one student is doing more than the other by themselves. They're going to need your guidance. Millennials want options in the classroom, both with assignments and with goals and rules of the class. They want to be given opportunities to own their own learning and own their own experience. According to Dr. Tony Wagner, they need a teacher who's approachable and who coaches them and doesn't talk down to them. As they are also considered a coddled generation, they'll do better when they are provided with frequent and constructive feedback. As millennials are accustomed to being sheltered, they should be given many opportunities for extra credit or other ways to make up missed assignments and etc. This concludes today's discussion on millennials in the classroom. Thank you so very much for listening.